Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room. And we are a West Coast show in the middle of a BC election. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, as always, my co-host with the most, John Jurisic, and we're both looking forward to the election on Saturday, October the 19th. And we're going to have so much fun because, John, this is definitely an election for the ages.
No kidding. This is so much fun and so much unpredictable stuff going to be happening. So many new scenarios that we've never seen before. The three party leaders have come flying out of the gate with strong messaging to hopefully catch people's attention and pull support in a very close contest. David Eby is pulling out all the stops, now saying the carbon tax needs to go. And there's more help coming for the middle class trying to afford mortgages for new homes. The NDP also promises, and this is a late promise, to match their conservative rivals, to put addicts and the mentally ill into enforced treatment.
Meanwhile, John Rustad has promised to close all existing safe injection and inhalation sites and replace them with mental health and addiction treatment centers. The BC Conservatives also promising $3,000 per month as a tax break to renters and mortgage holders. That's going to young people.
Finally, Sonia Forstenow is hoping the BC Greens can hold the balance of power in a tight finish, along with the rogue independents. As kingmaker, Sonia and the Greens would call for voting age to be lowered to 16. They would maintain the carbon tax, and they would promote green industry and employment, keeping climate on the ballot. So, as we launch off, where do things stand in the world of opinion polls, Robin?
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you asked that question, John, because we are going to refer to Main Street polling. That's Main Street Research. They're a pollster from Eastern Canada, and they came out with a poll just at the beginning of the election process, in fact, just ahead of it. And according to Main Street, 38% will vote BC Conservative. At least this is at the beginning of the election campaign. 36% voting NDP, 6% vote Green Party, 18% still undecided. So it looks like a very, very tight race between the BC Conservatives and the NDP. And yet we have not factored in the BC United candidates, and there's about 5 of them that have said, yes, we're going to run as independents. So this could definitely change the equation. We'll have to wait and see. According to Main Street polling, here's the breakdown of seats in the legislature if the election was held on the eve of the campaign. 54 seats going to the BC Conservatives. That would be a majority government. 39 seats for the NDP, 0 seats for the Green Party.
Oh my. What a different story from 6 months ago. And obviously, just one poll, Robin. You know that there'll be plenty more rolling out during the campaign. Nothing is decided yet. And there's always been some crazy thing that happens during the campaign in BC politics. These are early indicators, and you better believe the parties are watching very, very closely, along with their own internal polling. So, the NDP have a lot of strength. Here is a breakdown of the regions where they enjoy comfortable leads heading into this campaign. NDP has strength on southern Vancouver Island, the city of Vancouver, Burnaby, New Westminster, Coquitlam, obviously southern Vancouver Island, and the Kootenay region. Major areas of contention where it's, who knows, Conservatives, NDP, Conservatives, are central and northern Vancouver Island, Surrey, West Fraser Valley, and East Richmond.
And for the BC Conservatives, they also have their areas of strength, John. They include Central Richmond, Delta, North Vancouver, Eastern Fraser Valley, the Okanagan, and the Central Interior.
You can really see in these numbers that the party that wins has to have the widest reach of support. And at this point, it appears that BC Conservatives have strong numbers in the interior and coastal industrial areas, while the NDP leads in the city of Vancouver, not bad, and is very strong on southern Vancouver Island. Main Street polling reports NDP leads in all Greater Victoria ridings, that the NDP leads in South Nanaimo and the Alberni Valley, that there are tight races in Cowichan Valley and Saanich North and the Islands.
And the Conservatives also have their areas of strength on Vancouver Island, according to Main Street. Courtney Comox, Ladysmith Oceanside, Nanaimo Lanцeville, and North Island, all places that, at least according to Main Street, at the beginning of the campaign, have a BC Conservative tinge. It looks like there's more support there, and we'll see if that holds. But these days of campaigning are going to continue to unfold. There'll be many, many more opinion polls ahead, so don't take this all to the bank. We'll see how it goes in a month's time. But it was interesting to read Les Lane's column in the Times Colonist, where he talked about how Victoria Beacon Hill could be a real place to follow, a very close riding. Now, this riding has been an NDP stronghold for years. And again, this time incumbent Grace Lohr is a cabinet minister. She's in a very strong position. However, Les Lane also points out that Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau is running for that seat for the first time. And Furstenau points out that she's been underestimated before and still won. So what I would say here is that a strong Green performance could definitely shift things around. I know that's what BC Conservative Tim Thielmann is hoping for. He believes if there was a split between the NDP and the Greens, it could greatly help him in terms of his overall prospects of winning in Victoria Beacon Hill. He also says there's a lot of cynicism at the doors as he goes out door knocking just about every day. Voters wondering about David Eby's sudden scrap of the carbon tax, also his change of tune on the idea of sending people with drugs and mental health issues to compulsory treatment. That's compulsory treatment. That's a big change. And Thielmann says this is a lot of changes taking place because the NDP is looking over its shoulders at the polls and is worried about the surging Conservative support.
Are they ever? I don't recall, seeing so much huge policy shift a month before an election. These things are generally set in stone. But Tim Thielmann, he isn't afraid to mix it up, is he? He also says that almost half of the people he's spoken to still don't have a family doctor, despite the NDP's claim last week that 88% now have a physician or nurse practitioner. Would like to see the backup to that. So what do you make of that claim, Tim?
Well, I mean, that number can't be true. At least it's not true in Victoria. So what they did is they took a number from the Doctors of BC, which said at least 700,000 British Columbians do not have a family doctor. And they said, well, that must be the ceiling. That must be how many don't. They flipped it around and said, well, 700,000 out of 5.5 million British Columbians means 12.5%. And so therefore 88% have family doctors. Well, that's probably not true. The Doctors of BC didn't say that more couldn't have them. In fact, here in Victoria, I know that's not true because we've been talking to people for 9 months. We've door knocked about 6,000 doors. About a third of those people are home, 2,000 people. I've talked to personally over half of those, so let's say 1,000 people. I ask almost every one of them, do you have a family doctor? And so let's say 500 people I've asked. I would say that 2 out of 5 tell me they do not have a family doctor, maybe more, close to half. So I don't know where they're getting their numbers. It's not from people that are living in Victoria.
And this is all coming out at the same time. We've just had another open letter from the doctors at Surrey Hospital saying that things are desperate there in terms of services. We know emergency rooms have been having huge problems staying open across the province. Obviously, healthcare has to be a central issue in this campaign upcoming.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've heard from doctors here, they're terrified to speak out. So for doctors to be speaking out now shows you how desperate they are, because the doctors I speak to say we don't want to speak publicly because we're worried we'll get punished by the health authority if we criticize the government's healthcare policies. So that is a concern. We've already seen a firefighter get punished for criticizing the government's performance around safety, and now we have doctors coming to politicians and speaking out with concerns around healthcare and being afraid to do it. That's a problem.
So the Conservatives are not cutting over $4 billion out of the healthcare system.
They claim that we're going to cut $4.2 billion or $4.1 billion for healthcare, which is a fabrication, a complete lie. It appears nowhere in the plan, but as you say, Robin, correctly, it will cost more money in the end term, right? And so how are we going to find efficiencies to pay for that Well, we're using an activity-based funding model that they use in Quebec, they use in places in Europe to great effect, to essentially draw funding away from top-heavy bureaucracies towards the front lines. More doctors, more nurses, more frontline caregivers. That's what we need. So there's a massive backlog right now of patients. We have some of the worst wait times for cancer patients in particular in the country. And our plan is to guarantee that critical diagnostic and surgical procedures get done within prescribed wait times. So we shorten the wait times. How are we going to do it? We don't have an ideological crusade against private care. And so we will pay for those out of the public health insurance, those procedures to get done in BC, out of BC, privately or publicly, so that they get done and we don't have people dying on wait lists.
So, like the Times columnist, we will also, on the Rumble Room, be keeping a close eye on Victoria Beacon Hill. We'll try to keep an eye on all the ridings to see what happens, because it's an exciting time. We'll also keep an eye on what's going on with these independents, former BC United / BC Liberals, who are running as independents. Does that make a difference to some of them? When do they cause splits? This will all unfold. And of course, these are strange times, so we'll have to wait and see.
As a former BC Chamber of Commerce board member, and as I know you've worked with them closely over the years, it was great to see that the BC Chamber of Commerce released an opinion poll of its membership, which shows the priorities of the business community center on lower taxes, greater public safety, and economic growth. Right on. We'll see if the various political parties will make a pitch directly to business, not only business, small business, which is comprised the majority of business in BC. Certainly the Conservatives were ahead of everyone by promising to drop the carbon tax.
Yeah, their Axe the Tax became quite a chant, and I know the NDP has now jumped on board, or at least they're making the promise, but that promise all hinges on what the federal government does. They can say, we want to remove this tax, but will Justin Trudeau go for it? At this point, it doesn't look very hopeful, but we'll have to stay tuned. And we also have to look at the removal of this tax and what that would mean, because it would be 19 cents per liter, according to a guest we have upcoming in just a few moments' time. 19 cents a liter right off the top if the BC portion of the carbon tax was removed. If the federal portion was removed, it would be almost 40 cents a liter. And you consider we're paying the most in the whole of North America for our gas at the pumps. The 40 cents makes a big difference, John.
You would think that we didn't have any natural resources in our country, right? Not. So with energy taxes, and energy in general is a major election issues, we thought, why don't we talk to an energy expert? Dan McTeague was a longtime federal MP, federal Liberal MP, who now from his Southern Ontario office speaks out as the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. So why don't we Zoom him in?
And now back with us once again in the Victoria Rumble Room, the esteemed Dan McTeague.
Yay!
Of course, famous for being on this show to talk about all things to do with energy in this country and a lot more. And Dan, great to have you back.
It's fantastic, Robin, to be here with you and John once again. And my goodness, how things are changing nationally, provincially, locally, and people.
Well, let's start with provincial, because it's getting pretty hot here. You probably know that we're having a provincial election. We're on the eve of the provincial election, and David Eby, our premier, our NDP premier, who has been stoutly supporting the carbon tax for quite some time, has suddenly said, we're gonna reverse it. We're gonna cancel the carbon tax if the federal Liberals let us do it. So, what do you think's behind that? What would be your guess, Dan?
I think the NDP has found new religion. They realize that taxing the daylights out of people with 17.61 cents a liter for the first carbon tax plus HST or GST in your province, and then adding a low carbon fuel standard to BC LCFS of another 17 to 20 cents a liter isn't a very bright way to try to encourage people to see things your way, especially when there's nothing to show for it. Save and accept what we saw yesterday in Ottawa, which is the Canadian Climate Institute, which received 50 million tax dollars to go polish the apple of the federal government, saying, yeah, emissions dropped a little bit. We know that's not the case. People are hurting. They see inflation and carbon tax as being one of the same. And parties that propose it, the federal NDP and the provincial NDP in BC, have taken the same position. They want to back away from this like a very bad smell.
And they probably read the polls like the rest of us and see that they need to do something.
Well, yeah, and the NDP's predecessor got away with this, as did the agreement that he had with the Green Party with Andrew Reaver. But the reality is that even back then, my proclamations, which caused me to lock horns with many on the left in your province from, I'd say, 2016 right up until 2019, was such that I said sooner or later, the public is going to realize that the bottom is falling out, that they can't afford to make ends meet. And being cute and trendy without making an argument that you're actually going to do something good for the environment. This is really all about CO2, which is a giver of life, but that's a debate for another day. The reality is that for most people, this is a bridge too far. They can't afford it. And governments, parties, policies, or polls, or call them what they are, trendsetters who think that this is a cute way of conducting public policy have got it spectacularly wrong. They should have listened to the old Dan a few years ago.
Well, we certainly got Flip-ageddon out here. Flip, flop, who knows? Well, it's next week. There'll be some other flipping and flopping. Premier, yep. Okay, let's be pragmatic here. The Premier here in BC has indicated the carbon tax should be dropped. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, however, they would need to change their policy at the federal level. Do you see them actually following David Eby's lead?
No, absolutely not. The Liberals this is a hill on which the Liberals have chosen to die, and they will die. I was participating in a debate last week with the esteemed good friend Stephen Ledrew, and both for and against. I said the Liberal Party, as we know it, is dead. It probably died a few years ago, but their tenacity, their willingness to pig-headedly stay in favor of this policy, which accomplishes nothing other than providing the government a source of taxation and revenue so they can spend it on their climate friends. And there are a lot of grifters that are out there, by the way, not subject to any kind of charitable oversight. I think it's game over for the federal Liberals. Don't have to go very far. We saw what happened in the riding downtown, solid riding of my former boss, Paul Martin, La Salle-Mauve. And then, of course, not far from where I am here, just on the outskirts of Toronto, the loss of St. Paul's last year. This isn't by accident. And it's not because the government's old. It's because the policies it's advocating are extraordinarily dangerous, pernicious, and harmful to the average consumer out there. And they recognize it very, very clearly. You and I, John, talked about 2 months ago about how the hardship the Canadians are feeling. That hardship is made no better by this. And of course, it continues to be a major factor. And I think people are poised and pumped about getting out to vote and rid the country of these bad politicians.
I want to ask a little bit about the non-confidence vote. Yves Blanchette from the Bloc Québécois has stepped in as the savior of the Liberals. But in return for that, he's saying that he wants to stop oil and gas development in Canada. I mean, what's his end game in that? And would the Liberals actually acquiesce to something like that?
Well, they probably would, and they probably have. We'll see what happens in the budget. It's only a matter of time before the Liberals' number is called. But here's the irony. Quebec cashes in $13.3 billion every year on equalization, which it gets, ironically, to a large extent because of Canada's oil and gas prowess. So, understandably, people in Saskatchewan, to a large extent, Alberta, and even Newfoundland probably feel a little bad because the money that is being raised for national, provincial, and municipal governments are being derived to the tune of $25 to $30 billion net every year that's going into the coffers of governments. And Quebec wants to turn around, drop its hydro rates deliberately to make sure they have a loss so they can continue to operate what I think for many people is growingly a scam in our equalization process. It's a glaring one, and I think that Mr. Blanchette may very well find a lot of Canadians are taking a very different view than when I was involved in 1995 with the campaign on sovereignty and the clear question. Is that many Canadians just basically, if the country is coming down to what Pierre Elliott Trudeau called, the federal government serving as head waiter, going to the various needs of the provinces, then I think a lot of Canadians are taking the view, certainly, and I'm hearing in a lot of circles, if this Blanchette, a separatist committed to the destruction of the country, wants to get more, extort more from the country, then it may be a time for him and the Quebec issue to be resolved once and for all, leave. And I don't agree with that. But because I'm French Canadian, and there's a good reason for that, je peux parler dans les deux langues n'importe quel temps, but I won't try that right now. But I have very strong feelings as to why I think the separatists should be the last thing my former federal Liberal Party should be jumping in bed with. It's a very dangerous, pernicious thing. Justin Trudeau had any kind of faith in the country first, he'd be calling an election. He'd be dissolving Parliament immediately.
Dan, you're on fire. It's fabulous. Love it. Let's go. Once again, sort of practical.
say the fire is always red.
Let's go once again a little bit to some practical, strategic, political chatter. How big an issue is energy going to be in the run-up to next year's federal election? It should be a big one. Nonetheless, the Liberals have said no to increased natural gas exports to Europe. Is this going to change? Is energy going to be a priority on everyone's mind next year, or hopefully earlier?
Yeah, John, a good question. If it can be cast as an issue of affordability and resuscitating our purchase power, then I think a lot of Canadians will pay more attention to that. I have a sense that the Conservatives understand that that's where the middle class is at, where the average ordinary person is at. And they well understand what happens when you block pipelines, as we've done in this country, when you bend over backwards for every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there, rather than simply saying the federal government has made a decision, we're going to stand by it. We saw in your province the folly of bending over backwards for various groups, including a provincial government, which said they'll use every tool in the toolbox. And it wound up taking a project that would have cost us nothing, for which we would have benefits, to $32 billion now that Canadians have had to suffer and will continue to have to pay in the days to come. However Canadians parse this, I think an argument can be made, given that we've had not one, but 12 of our most important allies globally coming to us, and I'm not just talking Germany, I'm not just talking South Korea, I'm not talking Latvia, but many other Greece, many other countries came and said, please, can you get us some oil and gas? We'd prefer to buy it from you than we'd prefer to get it from the host of bad actors out there, including Iran. I don't need to say more than that, or Venezuela. The reality is that I think for most Canadians, if you can make an argument saying the more oil we sell, the stronger our dollar, the stronger our finances, I think Canadians will say that's the way to right the ship, and they will support not only one, but two terms for that particular party that proposes that. In my view, that currently is only the Conservative Party at this stage.
The Liberals, the federal Liberals, are looking for a great savior, a great hope. We keep hearing names popping up in that discussion. And you're a longtime MP, a Liberal MP. You know how the party works. How do you think they judge someone like the former head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, Mark Carney? He's back. He's now a special advisor to the government on economics. All the rumors point to him being the next prime minister, at least wanting to be the next prime minister of Canada as a Liberal. Do you think he has the cred, and do you think he has the tools to be a successful politician, aside from what he could do as the manager of these national banks?
Well, apart from him and his record, which is not exactly perfect or exuberant, I think the problem has been that Justin Trudeau did not create a circumstance where he created any obvious successors to his time as leader. Now, that's not necessarily indifferent from other leaders in the past who said, I'm the leader, that's where the buck stops here. But I think Justin Trudeau knew 6 months ago, 9 months ago, certainly as advisors, anybody like us who've been around the business for a while would have said the time to have left would have been 2023, not holding out to the last minute. Now, of course, he's damned the torpedoes. He's going to stay in. He's going to go down with a sinking ship.
So you don't think he's going to step aside for Mark Carney?
Yeah, he will not. And even if he does, Mark Carney would be, if he had any political sense, he would know that he's inheriting the proverbial poison chalice. He will lose. And he will lose badly.
But what's your estimation of Mark Carney? Do you think Mark Carney has the tools? I mean, he sounds a little bit like a Michael Ignatieff. Am I wrong in that?
Walk with kings, but keep the common touch. He doesn't have the common touch. I don't think this man can relate to ordinary folks in downtown and speak to issues that they understand. He's a very intelligent man. He's very well positioned within companies that are doing extraordinarily well. In fact, I think it's legitimate to say that some of the request by Brookfield Properties, his company, which he shares, is now, of course, making a request from the federal government for $10 billion from our pension plan in order to make a deal. Perhaps it'll be good, perhaps it'll be bad. My sense is that Mr. Carney has missed the opportunity, not of his own making, perhaps, but because Justin Trudeau has been so pig-headed in saying he doesn't want anybody. Après moi la déluge, Louis XIV did the very same thing. The reality is that Justin Trudeau is going to likely bring the party not only to its knees, but to the brink of extinction. I believe the party will be annihilated, and it will take several terms before it actually gets back in any semblance, but certainly not the way it was in my time. That is a party of the center that always found a consensus and a balance in terms of the right and the left, and good ideas from bad ideas, representing the broad stream interests of the country.
Dan, more future gazing. Our former Premier Christy Clark spent the last couple of months in France, brushing up on her French skills. There are rumors she'd like to be Canada's next Prime Minister, ahead of Mark Carney, and she's already out there defending the carbon tax, which of course was established quite a while ago by the BC Liberal government. What do you make of Christy Clark and all these machinations?
I don't know her that well. I know her former husband, Mark Marison, and I grew up as young Turks in the Liberal Party way back when. I know he's still out there saying this terrible thing about the provincial Conservatives, but I think it's very much in keeping with BC politics. Given that he's from Ontario, he would probably think things from an Ontario perspective, not to take away from him, but the reality is I think Christy has had her day. Look, the time to learn French would have been years ago. I can speak both languages. It is my mother tongue. Doesn't make me qualified to be the leader of the Liberal Party. I think anytime someone wants to say they have an interest in running the party, particularly given a set of very bad policies that damage the Liberal Party and damage the ability for Canadians to want to support them, I think anybody who comes into the campaign saying, I want to campaign on carbon taxes, unless they're really careful, and we're talking, William Nordhaus's version, the economist who won the Nobel Prize, who says, only a carbon tax, none of this other criteria of a low carbon fuel standard, no regulations on the industry, just one to send a price signal. Unless she's saying that, she's already lost the leadership. And she may win the leadership of a party that comes back with 20 seats, but you're going to have to spend 10 to 15 years trying to rebuild that party, its credibility, because it's been badly damaged in the minds of most Canadians for quite some time.
You mentioned Mark Marison. He's come out publicly. He's going to support David Eby and the NDP coming up in this provincial election. So all things are interesting in the province of BC when it comes to politics. Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre for a moment. It looks, according to all the polls, like he's a slam dunk. He's ahead in every poll in every province right now. And there is some feeling that it's too bad. I mean, this is followers of the Conservatives and people who want to see them succeed are saying it's too bad the election isn't right now, because we all know a year is an awfully long time in politics. It seems the economy is improving. Interest rates are coming down. There are signals that things aren't quite as bad as they have been. And that doesn't always work in favor of a party that keeps campaigning that, Canada's broken and we're here to fix it. So what do you think about Pierre Poilievre's prospects in a year? Can he keep up the kind of momentum that he has right now?
I think once the public has made up its mind, it's game over. I mean, we were very strong in 2004, 2005, 2006. That didn't prevent us from defeat ultimately. But I think the defeat is much more significant in terms of what has led up to it. Losing, key ridings that are foundational. I mean, if you're going to lose La Salle-et-Marne and Verdun, and you're going to lose St. Paul's, the seats that held up for us in the wipeout in 2011, where I went down, having won by 11,000 votes in 2008, I wound up losing by 900,000 votes in 2011. I think it's very clear the writing is on the wall. This party would be lucky, very lucky, to hold on to 25 seats. As far as Mr. Poilievre is concerned, he now has the opportunity to take back the center. People are sick of the tired progressive, trendy, ESG, woke, all the stuff that the left has really been preoccupying itself. It's left a massive vacuum of Canadians out there. I'd say almost half of them who feel truly disenfranchised with this. And a lot of Liberals of my generation who are now saying, hey, maybe it's if Poilievre can tone it down a little bit, maybe he'll have our support and he will be that new Liberal Party. Who knows? I know that we used to have two parties at the center fighting each other. We only have one now. And the Conservatives have to make a choice to remain at the center and to make sure that they continue to hip check the left, that is the NDP, Liberals and Greens, and the Bloc to the side.
Well, this has certainly been an action-packed show, John. One of the great things about doing a Rumble Room during an election campaign, there's so many things to talk about, and we'll have much more in the week coming up. But for now, this wraps up another Rumble Room. If you'd be so kind to, again, tell our many, many beloved viewers how they can continue to follow the show. They can support us by passing it on to others. And there's all kinds of platforms where you can find us.
It was a busy show and so fun to talk about all this stuff. We're just at the beginning of this election, this provincial election. And of course, down south, they're in the end of theirs. So October is going to be exhausting with all kinds of election stuff talking on the Rumble Room. We have such a great time producing the show, don't we? And really appreciate that so many people are following us and supporting this effort to date. Just over 2.3 million cumulative viewers have watched us do this every week. We are a nonprofit production for the benefit of people who like open dialogue from a middle-class, middle-of-the-road perspective. You can catch us on Twitter, where we got a ton of action. Catch us on Facebook. All of our videos and clips are on YouTube. We also have a podcast version of our interviews and our chats. We're also on Instagram, and we are on TikTok, which occasionally has a viral moment with our clips. Just recently, Dan McTeague talked about these very controversial gas taxes. Almost 35,000 people chirped in. So that's amazing. For now, I remain your humble servant, the Croatian sensation, John Jurisic.
And John, I'm always just humbled to be on your show. I'm Robin Adair, and it rhymes with humble. Rumble on.